Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And the Prime Minister seems set to head home today empty-handed after she tried to get improved terms from the European Union for her Brexit withdrawal agreement. She was told that there'll be no renegotiation and that it's up to her to get her deal through Parliament. So what happens next? Joining me to discuss that are the Labour MEP Richard Corbett, the leader of the Labour group in the European Parliament. And from Westminster, we're joined by the Conservative MEP, Charles Tannock. Mr. Tannock, thank you very much indeed for being with us. If I could go to you first, what do you think Mrs May should do now?
Well, clearly the government is up against a brick wall now because they went with effectively an impossible proposal to have a time limit on the backstop, which was never going to be acceptable to the 27. And Mrs May has come back with no solutions. And I think she made a mistake giving such assurances to the House of Commons that she would secure these assurances on the backstop. So now clearly it's about running down the clock, hoping that more pressure mounts on all MPs, both Labour and Tory, in the House of Commons, and she comes back in January resubmitting her withdrawal agreement for a vote this time. But I don't see the arithmetic in Parliament to support it. It's true that she's now defeated the ERG and the extreme wing of the party on Brexit, the Rees-Mogg faction, who clearly lost and are very bad losers, I have to say. But nevertheless, they still have the numbers to defeat her in the House of Commons on her withdrawal agreement when it's submitted for the meaningful vote. So, in my view, all that's left now, as the time runs out, is to pivot towards a very soft Brexit, Norway plus, in which we stay in the single market and the customs union, and she lifts her red lines on things like freedom of movement, or she does the right thing, in my view, which is to put it back to the people, to the electorate, in which there is a second referendum, and let them take the ownership of this very, very critical decision.
And Richard Corbett, if she were to do that, she would obviously need the support of Labour at Westminster or large sections of the Labour Party.
Yes, because you need legislation for a referendum, but as options run out, there's an overwhelming majority against leaving without a deal because of the dire consequences of that. But if the deal on the table is rejected, because it's a pretty bad deal, there's only two options left. Negotiate a different deal, and the possibility of that is shrinking significantly, or stop Brexit, which legally is very easy, but politically you have to have another referendum. It would be up to the people to decide, and indeed, according to the latest opinion polls, there is a growing clamour for it to return to the people to decide.
But, Mr Tannock, the other option, of course, which neither of you mentioned so far, is to leave, as Parliament has currently voted, at the end of March, without a deal. And you say that the Rees-Mogg faction have been defeated, but actually, as things stand, they'll get what they want, won't they?
Well, obviously, we are on kind of autopilot now. If nothing is done at all, you're absolutely right. On the 29th of March, we go over the abyss into a no-deal Brexit, which I think will be catastrophic for the economy. Obviously, the government's making plans now, contingency plans, and the EU27 are as well, for that matter. But it'll still be very damaging economically and very disruptive. Businesses will disinvest, jobs will go, and the economy will shrink. That's a given, frankly. So I don't think it's responsible for any government to consider a no deal as anything other than an absolute disaster. And so I think that, frankly, Mrs May will concede on either pivoting to a much softer Brexit, which of course would get round the whole Northern Irish border question. If we went for a Norway plus, there wouldn't be the need for a backstop ever to kick in, or goes for a people's vote. Because I think to actually allow a no-deal type of Brexit, and for the British government, a Tory government, to take ownership of that will be very, very damaging. If anything guarantees a Labour government under Corbyn, it will be a disastrous Tory no-deal Brexit, in my opinion.
And Richard Corbett, do you see any chance of Mrs May pivoting, as Mr Tannock puts it?
Well, I think indeed she surely wants to avoid a no-deal scenario. Charles is right that that is dire, because it means from one day to the next, every single existing EU arrangement, legislation, programme suddenly ceases to apply overnight. So everything from aircraft landing rights, citizens' rights of residence, continuity of contracts, end suddenly. We fall back on WTO rules with tariffs on our trade with our main trading partners. It would be, everybody in their right mind wants to avoid that. So given that she surely wants to avoid that, she has to indeed pivot to one of those two other options that Charles Tannock described, because her deal is not going to get through.
But she still says that her duty, as she sees it, is to deliver Brexit following the referendum of 2016. And, you know, if she faces that choice of preparing for a hard Brexit, which both sides are doing, she might well decide that she's going to do that rather than go back on and do things which she's explicitly said she would never do.
Well, my view on that, Adam, is that
it would be an act of supreme folly.
Yeah, for the Conservative Party in government, frankly.
Sorry, are you asking me or Charles? Yep.
Well,
it would be an act of
Richard.
supreme folly to take such a to go for such a damaging course of action would be an act of supreme folly. Now, I know she's ruled out other things, but there's plenty of things she's ruled out until very recently and suddenly done a U-turn on. And that may be, that is clearly the lesser of two evils, to do a U-turn and go for either a very different Brexit or probably more likely as time goes on, for reconsidering it through a referendum.
Ms. Tannock, do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the no deal should be ruled out explicitly, because it would be highly irresponsible for any government to entertain such an outcome. It was never remotely something offered or promised or considered during the referendum campaign. We were told that there was going to be a quick deal, an easy deal, that Britain held all the cards. And as I predicted at the time, this was clearly delusional thinking by some of the Brexiteers. We're now literally facing a brick wall in the next few weeks. And so clearly the government has to take some very, very serious decisions very quickly. We cannot kick the can down the road any further. And to me, the most democratic solution is to revisit the whole question and put to the people either remain in the European Union with all our opt-outs, as it's now clear from the Court of Justice decision, or leave on the basis of the May deal, as has been agreed by the 27. I think that's a perfectly decent choice. I think we can all live and we can all fall behind the result, whatever it is. I've said quite clearly that if the British electorate vote to leave after 2.5 years, and now they're fully informed, they can give full consent to what's happening, I will abide by that result 100%.
And Ms. Tannock, how do you take no-deal Brexit off the table at this stage? How could, I mean, that would presumably have to be done by you and your fellow MPs.
Well, it has to be done by, you know, the British government, basically, and that's a decision that has to be taken by the cabinet and Parliament. I mean, it's a highly political decision. I totally agree. If they can't do it, there is, of course, another option, which I think is not my favourite one, is to have a referendum with 3 questions, namely remain, leave with Mrs May's deal, the British government's deal, or leave with no deal. I personally don't think that's a good idea, but that may be one way of reconciling all these different demands and forces. But I know Justine Greening, for instance, my colleague, who belongs to the People's Vote movement alongside people like myself and Anna Soubry, she's an advocate of a 3-question type referendum. I think that's too complicated, personally, and it wouldn't be my preferred choice. But that's down to the House of Commons and to Parliament to decide what is on the ballot paper. And,
Mr Corbyn, is it time now for Labour to really take a leadership role in this? Because at the moment we just have Labour playing for time, saying, well, at some point we want a confidence motion and we want a general election, and in the meantime we're not really going to tell the British people what we think should happen at this moment of political crisis.
Well, I think that now that Theresa May is returning empty-handed from the summit in Brussels, I think Labour's likely to move very quickly to posing a confidence motion, no confidence motion in this government. And after all, historically, a government that's made such a shambles and is facing defeat on its central task in the House of Commons would have given way, and there would be a general election. We'll see. We will try to see if that motion can be adopted. But as you know from our conference resolution, if it isn't, then we have to move very quickly to the remaining options, which includes, as our conference said, a public vote on the deal.
Now, we know that Mrs May is delaying parliamentary discussion, or plans to delay parliamentary discussion of this until after Christmas, when Parliament comes back in the new year. Are you saying that perhaps before Christmas, in the remaining days in Parliament, this might be the moment where Mr Corbyn might actually have that confidence debate?
Well, that's for my Westminster colleagues to decide. I think they're looking at that now. She's coming back empty-handed. That might be the appropriate moment to table the motion. Others are saying perhaps the most appropriate moment is when the deal is actually rejected, which it will be by the House of Commons, and that would be the moment to table a no-confidence motion. Either way, there really ought to be a general election, because this is a terrible government. It's shambolic. But if there isn't, Labour is ready to move on to the next stage of its conference resolution, logically, which is including the option of a vote on the deal. And if that's the only way out at that point, if Parliament doesn't want to leave without a deal, and it doesn't, if the only deal on the table has been rejected as totally inadequate, if there's no chance by then of having another deal, then the only option left is actually to reconsider Brexit. And all the arguments that were given by the Brexiteers for Brexit on the merits have fallen by the wayside. They've been proved to be untrue. The only remaining argument is that it is the will of the people, in which case we shouldn't proceed without checking that it really is still the will of the people, given that they seem to be showing every sign that public opinion has shifted as Brexit is turning out to be so different from what was promised by the Leave campaign.
Richard Corbett and Charles Tannock, thank you both very much indeed for joining me. You're watching All Out Politics. I'm live from Brussels. Coming up next, we'll be discussing what options face the Prime Minister.